Alright guys, so today on your Snow Day, you will be learning about the 5 political ideologies of World War II and the leaders who used them. Now, we're going to start out with FDR. FDR was elected for his 3rd term on November 5th, 1940, and he went into this 3rd term promising America that he would stay out of the war. Now, obviously that did not happen because of the Pearl Harbor attack by the Japanese, but at the beginning of his term, he did stick with the promise of neutrality. Now, he created the Lend-Lease program whenever Britain and other countries eventually ran out of cash to continue to pay for the supplies that we lent them. But we created a policy where you could at least lend out our supplies to as long as they were fighting the Nazis. Now, Roosevelt did do some controversial things, like having Japanese internment camps where he temporarily imprisoned over 100,000 Japanese Americans during the war. On the majority, though, his policy was still, the same as every single other American president. He was a Democrat, but back then a Democrat did not mean the same thing as it does now, so the policies were similar, but not completely across the board. But still, overall, it was very much of a democracy, and that's what we were fighting for, compared to other nations who had lost the want to be in a democracy after losing World War II and seeing the pitfalls. So there's a picture of him. All right, next we're going to go on Adolf Hitler. So he practiced Nazism, which was a form of fascism. So at this time, nationalism really became a big thing in Europe as countries when they were recovering from the war, started to want to fight for their own countries and get their own rights back. Now, racism was at the core of pretty much all of Adolf Hitler's teachings. Later on in this video, you will see a video of Hitler shouting to a crowd and doing his classic salute and wave, and just how many people that he brainwashed into, just you can see the whole scope, just how many people actually followed along with his teachings. Even if it was just out of fear, they still showed up and they still were passive observers. Now, Adolf Hitler was a Austrian-born dictator who led Nazi Germany. It was an absolute believer in the Aryan race. So he thought of the Aryans as the pure Germans. So this is an extreme form of nationalism where he was just taking out anybody who did not fit his definition of what a German was. So that would include that Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, anyone who was considered inferior would end up being rounded up and put in concentration camps. So the Gestapo enforced his strict loyalty to his party, and this will be helpful. Remember this because later on you can compare this to another political ideology where they use similar scare tactics and secret police. And he also had a youth foundation that made sure that the future of Nazi Germany was its children, right? So if you can put children into a program that'll teach them your values, that'll make sure that they grow up and they're forced to prepare for either military service or what I put here, motherhood. So he wanted to create the perfect Germans, and the best way to continue that forth was to make sure the children also were being created into perfect Germans. So overall, Nazism would be, extreme extreme fascism, total dictator ruleship, very few influence from other people. It was pretty much just all Hitler, and also everyone was scared of him. All right, so another fascism party at this time was Benito Mussolini. He promised restoration and prosperity, a very similar message to what Hitler gave. Hitler also rose to power on this message of prosperity after losing World War I. So after losing World War I, a lot of these states had to pay huge restoration costs. They went into extreme debt. They had taxes. They had their people were starving. It was horrible. So that's how these fascist dictators rose to power, but it was on this message of, I will get you out of this problem. We will be rich and prosperous once again. So technically, Italy was the world's first fascist state. So it's a political system based on militarism, extreme nationalism, and blind loyalty to its state and its leader. So same kind of themes here, ending of freedom of press, banned all political parties except for his own. Anyone who criticized him was jailed or murdered. And again, with the children, Mussolini is always right in school, so of course they were brought up to believe that he was, basically their god. Like, if you didn't agree with Mussolini, you were gonna probably end up in jail or dead. So yeah, it's another, obviously, same side as Hitler during the war. So then Japan also had a similar loss of faith after World War One. So militarism became huge. They took over in 1936. So Hideki Tojo is the guy that we are focusing on in this presentation, but technically the emperor still was technically in charge. Everyone was fighting for the emperor. That's what they believed, but really Tojo was in the background was making sure everything was happening. Like, he took over the military. He was in charge of what was going on in day-to-day life. The emperor was a passive figure, but he still allowed these things to go on, so he was still charged with war crimes as well. So, again, with the similar preachings of how the Japanese are superior to other Asians and non-Asians, so that they were mostly focused on, Taiwan, China, Thailand, Korea. Like, they're all superior. They basically have this message of we are superior than all the other Asian countries. We're the best. They believe the military was the key to advancement, so if you have a strong military, then you could defeat everyone else, which means that you could become a world power. They had a more totalitarian state than authoritarian, like in Nazi Germany. So they had more total rule. Like, it was all Tojo. In Nazi Germany, Hitler had other advisors and other people who did help influence his rule. So it was more total control, total everyday control of the citizens' lives were happening in Japan. So the greatest honor for citizens was, either to die serving for the emperor in war. And so warriors were not afraid of death. Like, there's a very famous way that they used to commit suicide, which would be if they would rather die by their own hand fall on their own sword than be defeated by an enemy. So, and then women, of course, since they were not allowed to serve in the military, they at least had to have sons to serve the emperor. All right, so then Russia was a totalitarian state at the time as well. So Stalinism, which would be the Soviet Communist Party, which did rule pretty late into the 20th century. So political opposition was treason, of course, like similar values to these other guys, where you're going to be sent to forced labor camps. Extreme cruelty, ruling with terror, state-controlled all day-to-day activity, propaganda and brainwashing was huge. So, same kind of thing with posters everywhere. Just, declaring how great of a leader they had. They had a dictatorial system of state capitalism, which is unique as in it's a state in which exploitation is merely controlled by the state. So, all their resources and things were controlled by the state. So, in a way, it's socialist in nature, with the fact that everything would go through the government and then be distributed to the people, but it also was a more extreme version of communism. So they forced quick economic growth to catch Russia up with the rest of the Western world, because Russia was always historically behind most of the world. So this quick economic growth did help catch them up. Some videos.
Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course U.S. History, and today we're going to discuss how World War II played out at home and also the meaning of the war. Mr. Green, so this is going to be like one of the boring philosophical ones then? Oh, me from the past. I remember when you were idealistic. I remember a time when all you cared about was the deep inner meaning of mostly girls. But you've changed, me from the past, and not in a good way. Previous 150 years. combined. Although a lot of this was financed with debt, much of the war was paid for with taxes. Like the federal government began the practice of withholding taxes from paychecks, for instance, a practice I first became familiar with when working at Steak and Shake, discovering that instead of being paid, I don't know, like $100 a week, I was being paid negative $30 a week because I had to declare my tips, because my dad made me. Before World War II, only 4 million Americans even paid federal income taxes, but after the war, 40 million did. Also, big business got even bigger.
All right, so you can see similar themes here with in America. We also were heavily financing the war with the citizens, kind of like how in other countries they would just have forced labor financing the war. We at least you still had your same job, you just had to pay a lot more taxes.
During the war, because of government contracts, cost-plus contracts guaranteed that companies would make a profit, and the lion's share of contracts went to the biggest businesses. So by the war's end, the 200 biggest American corporations controlled half of all of America's corporate assets. And all this government spending also spurred development, like defense spending basically created the West Coast as an industrial center, Seattle became a shipping and aircraft manufacturing hub, and California got 10% of all federal spending. And Los Angeles became the second largest manufacturing center in the country, meaning that it was not, in fact, built by Hollywood. It was built by World War II. All of this was pretty bad for the South, by the way, because most of this industrialization happened in cities, and the South only had 2 cities with more than 500,000 people. And organized labor continued to grow as well, with union membership soaring from around 9 million in 1940 to almost 15 million in 1945. Besides union-friendly New Deal policies, the government forced employers to recognize unions in order to prevent labor strife and keep the factories humming so that war production would not decrease. And from a human history standpoint, one of the biggest changes is that many of the workers in those factories were women. You've probably seen this picture of Rosie the Riveter, and while there wasn't actually a riveter named Rosie, or maybe there was, but she's an amalgam. But by 1944, women made up 1/3 of the civilian labor force, in addition to the 350,000 who were serving in the military. And the type of women who were working changed as well. Married women in their 30s outnumbered single women in the workforce. But the government and employers both saw this phenomenon as temporary. So when the war was over, most women workers, especially those in high-paying industrial jobs, were let go. Especially hard on working-class women who needed to work to survive and had to return to lower-paid work as domestics or in food services or, God forbid, as teachers. Now it's time for the mystery doc.
All right, so that's a video you guys can always go back and watch later if you want to see more.
Learning as this.
All right, so I will also be linking that on the website. But that is just some extra information about like the state of the United States during this time and how what was going on economy-wise. But yeah, so this is the video I'm showing right now. It's just a shot of the crowd found out very old and quickly, but it's basically just to show you guys the whole vast majority of people who come out in crowds and wave because no one was watching the camera obviously, and they would find you and come back to the rest of the time you were not following around with the rest of the crowd. So make sure that you do your homework because this is the website. Also, make sure you go back and watch the video.